Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for braving the elements. Boy, it was coming down there for a while. I'm David Simpson. I'm the program director here at the Work Center. Welcome. This is the first of three faculty events this week, where you get to hear our writing and visual arts faculty give readings and give artist talks, and they're really wonderful evenings. So I encourage you to come tonight, tomorrow night, and Wednesday night. Tonight we're going to hear from writer Paul Lisicky and printmaker Jim Stroud. So we give a big hand. Paul's going to read from his work, and Jim will do an artist talk, and then they'll do a joint Q&A after. Before we begin, a bit of housekeeping. Paul's books will be available for sale at the back of the room after the event, and he'll be signing books at the back of the room after the event, so don't miss that opportunity. There's also books from other faculty members of this week at the back table, and there's more books in the library from other faculty and former fellows in the bookstore in the gallery. And the gallery is open during and after the event, so if you haven't seen the show, the great show that's in there right now, Everyone We Know Is Here, curated by former fellow Heidi Hahn and featuring work by about 20 different former Fogg fellows. It's a beautiful show, so please check it out if you haven't already done so. All the work is for sale, and all the proceeds will benefit the artists and the Fine Arts Work Center. Big shout out to East End Books, who manages our bookstore. They're an important part of our community here, and they've been a terrific partner with Fogg for a long time. So we're grateful for them. And page 2, restrooms are located down the hall on the left if you need them. The sign-up sheet, this is very important, so pay attention. The sign-up sheet for the student reading is on that table for the student reading on Thursday night. If you haven't signed up for it, I strongly encourage you to do so. You won't regret it. You're in front of the most welcoming, embracing hometown crowd that you could ever hope for, and everyone will give you a big hug from the audience if you get up here and read. So I encourage you to sign up for the student readings. And finally, let's turn our cell phones to silent. Thank you. All right, so first, the first person who's going to read is Paul Lisicky, and I'd like to invite up his fellow faculty member for the week, Seema Reza, who's going to introduce Paul. Please welcome Seema.
I'm so delighted to introduce you, Paul. Paul Lisicky is the author of 6 books, including Later, My Life at the Edge of the World, and The Narrow Door. His forthcoming book is the memoir, The Sky in It, A Life with Joni Mitchell, which I hear he'll be reading from this evening. His work has appeared in The Atlantic, Conjunctions, The Cut, Fence, The New York Times, Plowshares, and elsewhere. His awards include fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation, the NEA, and the Fine Arts Work Center, where he has served on the writing committee since 2000. He is director of the MFA Program at Rutgers University-Camden, where he is associate professor and the editor of StoryQuarterly. He lives in Brooklyn. His readers commend the unique glimpse into his life and experiences his writing provides, and the Los Angeles Times praised his memoir writing as exalting in tenderness and lust, lit with flashes of poignant spectacle. Furthermore, Oprah magazine described Later, My Life at the Edge of the World as a vibrant, heart-bursting love letter to Queer Haven in Provincetown, Massachusetts. I would like to introduce Paul with something I wrote some years ago here in Provincetown, July 2019. Is this how I will spend my life? Drinking coffee, eating unadorned boiled eggs, reading Paul Lisicky and feeling sick to my stomach that I am not Paul Lisicky? If that is the case, so be it. I am grateful to live in a time when I have access to the work and brilliance of Paul Lisicky. Please welcome to the stage, Paul Lisicky.
Thank you so much, Seema. That makes my night. I'm really, really honored and delighted. And I'm so thankful for all of you to all of you for coming out in this hurricane. An hour ago, I was just completely fretting that no one was going to be here, and this is a deep and utter joy to see all your faces. I want to thank Sharon and David and Sarah and Bree and Miracle and Stephanie and Misha for bringing so much life to the Fine Arts Work Center at this point in its life. I'd like to thank my beautiful students. We had the most amazing class today, and I'm so happy to see so many of them here today. They astounded me with their insight and engagement and beautiful work. So I'm excited about the week ahead. And I'm excited about sharing the stage with Jim. So I think that's it for my introductions. I'm going to read, as Seema said, from The Sky in It, which is my book in part about Joni Mitchell, but it's mostly about Joni Mitchell in my life and all the ways she's taught me through her songs, enlivened me, helped me develop as an artist. And I think that's all you need to know. That the irony here is that I'm going to read to you from a chapter that's entitled Both Sides Now. And just a couple of weeks ago, my boyfriend Jude texted me and said, I'd be completely fine if I never heard Both Sides Now ever again. And I texted back and said, I was just thinking the same thing. And we're the deepest lovers of Joni Mitchell. A month ago tonight, we were in the audience at the Gorge Amphitheater in George Washington. And occasionally I think what we were feeling was probably just based. It's just something that was felt on that night. But there can be some pleasure in the sacrilege of someone whom you love so deeply, whose work matters so much. So I think that is all you need to know. All right. Mrs. Hill pushed the upright piano through the fourth grade classroom door, a feat she accomplished once a week, every Tuesday, in the hour before school let out. There was a mightiness about her which I might have missed if she weren't so short and her blonde hair weren't so high, pretzeled on top of her head. Her miniskirt came up higher than it should have come up, and she pulled it downward as she talked to us, as if its crawl were merely bothersome, even natural. No one shared mocking expressions behind her back as they did when other guests came to visit the class. Maybe because she was bringing music, and music calmed us. It was a gift. It dissolved rivalry, as if she'd carried a chocolate cake into the room and cut it in 20 pieces and gave us all the same portion. Mrs. Hill made music feel like it was meant for everyone, not just with those with special talents, even if she appreciated those with talents. She didn't play her favorites against anyone. Thus, people who didn't have the remotest concept of pitch yelled out the song she taught us, as if they were getting to know their lungs, lips, and breathing for the first time. I could live with their enthusiasm if it turned the whole group of us toward a good mood. Usually, Mrs. Hill picked songs in which children were supposed to sound like children. The songs were generally upbeat, windy, raindrops keep falling on my head, let the sunshine in, which was another way to say that children were supposed to be happy. If the children weren't happy, then what did that say about their teachers and parents? Perhaps it suggested that they hadn't done a very good job. They'd screwed up something that was too far gone to fix, and so it was up to the children to make sure the adults in charge felt successful in every way they knew. We'd show them that they'd taken good care of us. But today's song was different. It sounded happy on first listen, but on closer inspection, heartbroken at the same time. The person who had written it had lost things. I felt that. But the source of that sadness was deeper than merely growing up, changing, leaving a house and hometown behind. Maybe it was just that angel hair and ice cream castles were trying so hard to say that lightness lived alongside darkness. When I sang the song, my face grew long. The skin above my upper lip felt weighted. I hadn't known that I'd missed that feeling until I realized it was something to miss. And when I came home, I played and played until it sounded like I'd always known the song, and I couldn't hear all the erasures and repetitions that went into its making. Joni sat by the plane window looking out at the clouds. Saul Bellows' novel, Henderson the Rain King, lay open on her tray table, but she kept orbiting the same paragraph because she was more interested in the clouds outside in all their layers and dimensions, the range of colors from slate to fog to purest white. How could they be described? Muscular, Michelangelo. She thought of naked Adam touching God's outstretched finger. Maybe she'd already gotten what she'd wanted from the book, the picture of the narrator, Henderson, looking at a similar view on a flight to Africa. And to read beyond that would obscure what she wanted her heart and mind to hold. Henderson's insight? He was living during the first time in history when humans could look at clouds from above and below. Sometimes a book said all it needed to say in a picture. Sometimes a song did as well. Clouds called to her. If she looked at them long enough, she could pull them up inside her and get to know them. She could become clouds if she tried hard enough. She could conjure them up on her guitar until the chords she played sounded wet, dripping. She'd have to wipe off the rain from her hands. The new song came together quickly, and she was performing it on Gene Shea's radio show in Philadelphia when it was only a couple of days old. She felt proud of the song as she played and sang it, but didn't seem to know that it stood out from any of her other songs. Surely, it was more straightforward without the complex chords and melodic leaps, qualities that her fellow musicians thought of as Joni moves with simultaneous envy and dismissal. A lot of people could have written this song, at least its melody and chords. She was writing all the time, the archive was growing every day, and she didn't have to worry so much about whether one song was better than the other because a new one might emerge as she was testing the pegs for a new tuning. She wouldn't know that Judy Collins would soon call her up in the middle of the night asking to record what would turn out to reach number 8 on the US singles chart. Wouldn't know that 1,616 other singers would record the song. Frank Sinatra, Harry Belafonte, Bing Crosby, Glenn Campbell, the kinds of musicians her parents would listen to on their living room record player. Wouldn't know that decades later it would be central to at least 2 movies, one of which would win the Academy Award for Best Picture. Had she stopped there, a whole career could have thrived on that foundation. When she went backstage to congratulate Mabel Mercer for her performance of the song, Joni told her that it needed the voice of an older woman, someone with life experience. "And what do you know about suffering?" Mabel said in plummy disapproval. Joni hadn't mentioned that she was the writer of the song. Of course she'd known plenty about suffering through polio, through teaching herself how to walk a second time, but perhaps took some satisfaction that she could pass as unharmed. Pain wasn't always written on her face. At the end of the day, Mrs. Hill pushed the piano out toward the open classroom door. My classmates had already left the building, running out into the blacktop to get on their buses. There wasn't much time, as I had some rubber steps to climb up on too. I heard the words before I spoke them. They broke through the surface, cresting around a shoal. I'd never asked anyone for a favor before, especially an adult who wasn't my father or mother. She looked at me through her glasses, looked straight into my eyes, as if whatever I had to say was practical, news she'd been waiting to hear from me. These were not the days when parents thought people of my age were important. They left us alone. They let us roam away from our backyards where we could be gone for hours, collecting stones, pushing tadpoles around, setting fires to piles of broken sticks and running away. There was freedom in this model, but adults and children didn't have a clue as to how to talk to each other. The divide was too wide. What did I ask? It was as simple as asking if I could play the piano solo for the next school concert. I didn't know how I did it without turning my head away or letting my eyes fall in shame. Goodbye, child. I was an adult now. An exhaustion came over me as if I were a fish and a net were dropped from above, and inside I was thrashing, but silent and moving my mouth. I felt as if I were asking more from life than I deserved. And what if she said, "Are you kidding? You're putting me in an awful position. You want too much. Why you and not Todd Magnet or Mia Stern? You're very talented, but they're talented too, Paul." I hadn't come up with a backup plan, and the thought of that almost made me topple over. "Play for me," she said calmly. She took a step backward, hugging herself. A cold draft blew from the vent in the ceiling above. My broken heart, I thought, but without the words. "Keep going," she said, after I looked over my shoulder. "I'm here." And that was exactly what I did for her. One day, I found her in the bin at the Corvette's record department. By then, I knew her name was Joni Mitchell and had imagined what she'd look like, but it was still a shock to see her face, not in one of my dreams, but in public, where people bought bath towels, irons, nail polish, and St. Joseph's aspirin for children. The album featured a self-portrait against a backdrop of woods, a river, some low clouds, layers of yellow, orange, darker orange, claret. A red lily held up to her face. A face as wide open as a mountain lion, eyes as clear as water in a stream, no ego. It wanted to assure you that calm was possible, but maybe in order to get to that calm, you had to suffer first. In the background, a castle, Bavarian, with high roof peaks. Later, I'd find out that it was the Bessborough Hotel, a railway-era landmark in Saskatoon, where Joni encamped whenever she went back to visit her hometown. For now, I thought of it as a hospital. Low lights humming in the windows, both sunrise and sunset in that sky at once. As much darkness as illumination, that darkness easy to miss at first. The cover was a lot like the song. It drew you in with its optimism before showing you that turbulence was a given. Turbulence was the engine that made the trees grow behind her. If I looked long enough at that face, I felt the space growing between the two of us. I turned away for a second. No one would have ever mistaken us for relatives, not even distant. In another time, in a different body, I would have walked up to the stage and the people would have clapped before I sat down to play the piano. I'd nod, both appreciative and patient. Maybe I'd even give them a smile so broad it was on the edge of plastic before waiting for everyone to settle down. Once I'd begin to play, the whole room would have gone silent. No one shifting in their chairs, no one yawning or stepping around people's legs and bags for a bathroom break or a smoke outside by the flagpole. I would have felt calmed by that silence, not afraid of it, as if it were a sign that I'd made everyone feel a little more alive in a world that wanted to dull us at every turn, that wanted to take our shine away. And what did that make us do? It made a lot of us mean when we didn't want to be mean. People wanted to be better than that. That was their secret. Instead, something else happened. I was playing the third verse and the floor holding up the room opened. The sounds that I had been taking for granted beneath my fingers went strange, and the grid that had been holding us all together collapsed. No, not collapsed. Nothing as extreme as all that. Instead, the squares of the grid went loose, as if they'd grown weary of the tension they'd had to carry. I felt how strange it was to be a 9-year-old boy with arms, legs, and fingers, and an occasionally mangled last name in the school auditorium in New Jersey, which probably wouldn't be around in 100 years, even less. The people out in those chairs wouldn't be around in 100 years, not a single one of them, and I felt terrible for them, for all the life they'd miss, the birthdays, the music, the days at the beach or in the woods, buying things, groceries. I felt that they couldn't handle that about themselves. And what carried me were the people in those chairs was a different set of notes. I'd wandered away from the notes I'd been playing. Did anyone notice or care? If they did, they didn't betray it on their faces, no frowns or looks of concern, not even from Mrs. Hill, who stood backstage behind the curtain patterned with cherries, looking at me with the face of love, a love that was different from the love that came from my parents, but definitely significant. She wanted the best for me. I knew that my version was good, which is not to say that I thought I was improving the song. I was turning it toward a direction that sounded like me, to how my hands wanted to reach, hammer, curl, and contract. It was all of 3 measures, 10 seconds. The hour was 8:10. The clock on the wall told me so. Then the grid reinforced itself, and I was back to the world of rules, routines, punishments, and expectations. It sent me forth into the crowd to sit down between my parents. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Another round of applause for Paul Lisicky. Can't wait for the book to come out. Thank you. Next, we're going to welcome Jim Stroud to the stage. And to do that, I'm going to invite to the stage, hold on, you're on the right page, a friend and colleague of Jim's, Richard Waller. Please welcome Richard to introduce Jim.
Good evening. I'm Richard Waller. I'm an Executive Director Emeritus of the University of Richmond Museums. I'm delighted to introduce James Stroud this evening. We've known each other for more than 25 years. Jim is a painter and master printer who is the founder and director of Center Street Studio, a professional printmaking workshop that prints and publishes contemporary prints with emerging and established artists. The Center Street Studio archives are now part of the Harnett Print Study Center at the University of Richmond. And Jim and I have worked together on making that happen over the last couple of decades, back into the last century. Jim's work is represented in several public collections, including the National Gallery of Art in D.C., the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, the Pushkin Museum in Moscow, the Yale University Art Gallery, and the Hood Museum of Art at Dartmouth College. Under his direction, Center Street Studio has created a richly supportive and vibrant atmosphere for artists and collaborations. And I'm happy to be here this year as a student of Jim. We're kind of reversing roles. He is well recognized for his work with artists to publish, promote, distribute, and exhibit works by the artists that he has collaborated with. It's my pleasure to have Jim Stroud here with us. And
great. Thank you so much. It's really great to be here. I love being invited to come and teach here at Fogg every year, and that they allow me to come and make such a huge mess of their print shop that poor Bert Yarbrough, who's here in the audience, has to clean up after. And thank everybody here at Fogg for making this happen, and I'm just glad to be here. It's always a challenge, you know, having to follow up on these writers, you know, these authors. It's like, they're so damn eloquent. And, you know, I just have to hope that the picture is worth 1,000 words here. So here we are, Center Street Studio. I'm going to start with my printmaking pedagogical pedigree. I cut my teeth as a printmaker studying with this man, Stanley William Hayter, who was a British expat in Paris in 1928, and he started a workshop called Atelier 17, which was an open workshop to have many artists come and work and share ideas and share technical expertise. And he's really known for sort of shepherding in printmaking, the modern print. He pulled it out of the sort of the reproduction mode that it fell into in the 19th century and made it a primary creative mode in the 20th century. And many, many artists worked with him over the years. He started the shop in 1928, and you know, Picasso and Miro and all these guys came, and then he moved it from Paris to New York during World War II, and all the surrealists that fled the war came to New York and would work with him there, and then he brought it back to Paris in 1950, and I worked with him in 1980-81. Right out of college. And there's a young buck, Jim Stroud, in Paris with Stanley William Hayter, who turned 80 the year I was there. When I came back to the States, I worked in New York City just as an artist and an assistant to an art consultant, and was applying to graduate school. I was fortunate to get in to the Yale School of Art that had a major painting and printmaking program combined. And I worked with this gentleman, Gabor Peterdi, who's a Hungarian painter and printmaker who worked with Hayter in the 1930s in Paris, and I've worked with Hayter in the 1980s in Paris. Can you imagine that? That's crazy. So enough of that. And please, come on now. I'm just going to go zipping through. Oh, okay, here we go. Let's go back. As soon as you... So the studio, I established a studio in Gloucester, Massachusetts in 1986. And over the years had to keep moving it to various places as rents continue to rise. From Gloucester, I moved to downtown Boston, the Fort Point Channel section. Then rents in that part of town were really getting crazy, so my wife and I realized the writing was on the wall. And we bought a farmhouse in Milton, Massachusetts, just south of town, that had an acre of land, and we decided to build our own studio on the property. And this is a post and beam barn that we had Janine designed, and we had built next to our home. And it went up in 5 days. It was tight to the weather in 5 days. Every time I push this, it goes. Apologies. There we go. I just get to see it under construction. That's the house is 1885 farmhouse. Here. And there you go. That's in the relation to the house. And the gardens were all done by a beautiful sculptor named Ron Rudnicki, who's sadly passed away, but the interior. And so this is where all the action happens. So do folks know what master printer relationship and publishing is? I'll explain that a little bit. So as an artist and master printer, I invite artists to come work with me to collaborate on print projects. And I actually, as publisher, I fund them. So the artist pays nothing, and we work together. They come with ideas, they come with a notion of what they might want to do, and I work up a technical sort of strategy to get there, and then they rely on me to do all the technical stuff to make that happen. So I pay for all that activity, and then I also print the editions, and I become the primary dealer of them and get them out into the world to museums and to galleries and to private collections. But in the old days, an artist would do a drawing, a preparatory drawing first, as this is. This is actually a graphite drawing by George Whitman, who I've been publishing, who's here with us today, and he's one of my students. Even though he's been one of my artists for like 25 years, I've been publishing his work. So it's not much I can really teach him here because he knows it pretty well, but he's learning a different technique, and it's the first time he's applying aquatint to his work. But this is a beautiful graphite drawing of a recent project we've been working on. And that's actually the etching of it, all right? And you can see. Now, actually, take that back. That's not the etching. That's actually the copper plate, because it's the same orientation. Oops, there we go. I gave it away. So here's the graphite drawing, and here's the copper plate, which he's drawn exactly the same direction, right? And so so I give him a copper plate. It's covered with a hard ground, which is just an acid resist paint. His job is with a needle is to draw he's redrawing that drawing. It's not transferred onto the copper plate. He's actually drawing every single line, every little stipple in it. And then I etch it into the plate with acid. And then that's the resultant print. Inked, wiped, and printed. And you see it's reversed. So that's the 18th century or 17th century way of doing things. You know? George is retro. And most of the projects are a little bit more. Here we are actually printing that plate in the studio. So, but all the other projects are a little more complicated. They're a little more open-ended, and there's a lot more creativity in the sort of technical strategy that I have to come up with, which is oftentimes on the fly, to get things to happen that are meaningful between the printmaking medium that we're using, whether it's etching, woodcut, or monotype, to their primary work. And that's really important process. And what's interesting is I was a visiting artist at UMass Boston about 3 years ago. And a young woman who was in that class had an assignment in an art history class where she had to come up with an idea and curate an exhibition, and sort of theoretically. And so she loved what I did. She loved prints, and she came up with this idea: would it be great to have an exhibition of prints published by Center Street Studio, juxtaposed against a primary work by each of the artists, whether it's in sculpture or in painting, so people can see where these prints came from, what informed the prints. And it was a great project, and the director of the gallery at UMass Boston decided he wanted to actually to have this happen. It took 3 years to get into the schedule, and it happened actually just this past spring. And it was called Center Street Studio Translations in Print, and it was an absolutely wonderful exhibition. It was so good that I actually lifted the idea, and whenever I do art fairs now, I do exactly this. I borrow a primary work by each of the artists that I'm showing in my booth and put it next to their prints. So I'm going to actually walk you guys through the exhibition. Tamara Manova is the young woman on the right. She is the curator, and on the left is Sam Toby, the director of the gallery. And that's me, and we're going to come back to this work later, because that's what I'll end with. So here you see a painting on the right by Marcus Lindenbrink. It's epoxy paintings that he layers in many, many layers and then rips through with routing tools to expose the many layers of color underneath. And my job was to come up with some sort of interesting monotype technique that spoke to that process. And here we have a monotype. I think I might have a close-up of that, where we've manipulated the viscosities of the various inks that we're using, and he paints directly on the press. We run it through a great deal of pressure, and the resultant print on the left comes out. They're astounding. On the left is Carrie Moyer. It's a painting of hers, a recent painting from 2022, and the two prints on the right are monotypes with woodcut elements and graphite drawing that were done in 2006. And so they're unbelievable visual connections between work that is 18 years apart. Here you can see the painting and the monotype a little more clearly. And there you can see the depth of these routed troughs through many, like probably about 3 inches of poured and hardened resin. And there's the print we come up with. And this was a result of my frustration with when he first started coming with me. I was having a hard time figuring out how to make meaningful monotypes with him, and he was painting directly and dripping things onto plates, and I'd run them through, and they were just awful. And so after the first day, he was frustrated, and I was nervous. And the next morning I woke up early, and I just had an idea, didn't know if it was going to work. I started adjusting the viscosities of all these squirt bottles of color that we were using, and told him to paint directly on the press bed. I marked off the paper on the stainless steel press bed. I said, just paint on it. And he goes, what's going to happen? I said, I don't know. Let's see what happens. And he does that. We lay the paper down, crank the pressure all the way down, and that's what came out the other side one time through the press. And he was freaked out and said, okay, let's go. And we made, I think, 31 in the week, 31 of those. Here he is working on our most recent project. These are larger versions of those that are 60 by 60 inches. And this is the Carrie Moyer painting, and those really astounding. That's the first project I did with her back in 2006. And there's a lot of these sort of spatial tricks, like these visual spatial tricks that she uses that have been consistent throughout her work over the years. And that's a close-up of another one. I didn't have a close-up of the other two. On the right is Bill Thompson, who's a sculptor who makes these beautiful urethane sculptures that are painted with automotive paints, polyurethane auto paints, or the polyurethane blocks with urethane paint on them. On the left is a painting by Richard Ryan with an enormous woodcut that actually the painting is based on the woodcut, and we'll talk about that there. So this is actually a grisaille painting, enormous 72 by 60, I believe, and it's called 13 Blue Poppies. What's interesting, it's based on a gouache. He made a gouache. It was a study for that painting, then made the woodcut from the gouache, and then made the painting from the woodcut. It's usually the other way around, right? And that's an enormous woodcut. That's 64 by 40, that woodcut. There's just a delay in this thing. I don't know why, but come on. There we go. And that's me and my son, Ryder, inking and putting the block on press, getting ready to print. And you can see the edition being printed in the back there. That's how we hang them to dry for a few weeks. There you go. And the Bill Thompsons, this is great. So making a meaningful translation of sculptural ideas into a 2D medium of print is not easy. And so this is typical of Bill's sculpture. He sort of makes these minimal shapes and assigns them names that sort of evoke a certain meaning about that shape. This one's called Magistrate. And so we had this idea. He came with some shapes in cut out of mat board. We scanned them into a computer, sent that information to a water jet cutting machine, and those that machine cut copper plates into the shapes that he had done. I etched them with aquatint so that they were 100% flat, and we printed them, and they were beautiful shapes with a beautiful color, but not very interesting, and didn't really have a sculptural presence. Not that we were trying to evoke like an illusion of 3 dimensions, but it just didn't speak to his sculpture. And then he started sort of essential racing, or sort of abrading the surface of it more so towards the center and less towards the end, evoked a sense of volume, and it looked horrible when I printed it. So out of frustration, the next day I etched them all back to 100% flat, and then on a whim, I took out an enormous roller, rolled a second color on top of a different color, and when I ran it through the press, you got this in beautiful sort of soft glow that happened in the middle of the print, and I didn't know how that happened. I thought it was a fluke, so I did it again, and it happened consistently. And I did it again, it happened consistently. So I had him come up and say, "What do you think of this?" And he loved it. And I assume there's a physics thing going on here where the pressure is slightly greater around the perimeter. So for instance, the orange one that you see in the center is actually, I ink it with red and then roll a yellow over the surface. And through the pressure of the press, they sort of emulsify and mix, but they seem to mix more around the perimeter than they do in the center. And that happened consistently out through the entire edition. And that's the kind of discovery, that's the kind of invention. I mean, nobody knows, no one's done this before. No one had to do it before, and I figured it out just on intuition. And that's why I do what I do. That kind of thing happens. It's so bloody exciting that it happens. And the artist is surprised. And so if you can see that we did, that's actually a triptych up top, but we did it for several other projects. And there they are close up. And that's the newest one called Crest. Actually, I lied. This is the newest one, but it's a different thing. That's called Inkwell, and that's that sort of stylized shape in the center is an inkwell, and all the text in the back is a photo etching, is exactly what we're doing here in my workshop using this photo etch material. And that is all writing. He inherited a sermon notebook from his great-great-great-grandfather, and we took pages from that and we copied them and made them into films and then flashed them on the plate and etched them into the surface. And he's never done anything like that where he's articulated the backgrounds, but it was meaningful that he had just gotten this sort of sermon book. So during COVID, I couldn't have artists come to the studio, so I had to come up with projects where they can do on their own in their studio. So my wife, Janine Wong, introduced me to this great technique called watercolor monotype. And you can make these super saturated watercolor solutions, and I would make a full palette of them, send them to my artists along with these dendril vellums, which are plastic plates, and tell them to paint on them in their own studio, which they were able to do. Let them completely dry, then send them back to me, and then by preparing the paper correctly and getting the proper amount of pressure on the press, I can reconstitute the watercolors from the dendril vellum back onto the sheets completely. And that gave them the opportunity to produce a body of work, but also it's very open and organic where they can put some marks down, and if they don't like it, they can wipe it away and rework it because it doesn't absorb into the plastic vellum, right? So it's an open organic painterly process. And once that's done, they let it dry, they bring it back to me, or they send it back to me, and then I'm able to process them. And this is another one. This is Eva Lundsager, another painter. That's a painting on top, and that's one of her watercolor monotypes she did during COVID. They're amazing, right? Every little nuance comes off that plate. This is one of my artists. This is Charles Ritchie, and Charles is a beautiful painter and makes beautiful drawings, all very small scale. Part of the exhibition, they wanted to do sort of a teaching aspect to it. So in the vitrine, we put some printmaking tools, a plate, and Charles keeps these beautiful journals that his wife hand binds, and they're fit into the back pocket of his jeans. And he takes it out and writes in them and makes these beautiful drawings. And they're really just for himself. They're personal for his own study and his own experimentation for his paintings and on paper. Everybody, when he shows them with exhibitions, people all want to buy them, but he won't sell them. They're too personal. And so I said, Charlie, why don't we make an artist book that is based on a journal from a particular month that you keep specifically for the print project? And he agreed, and so there is, and again, we use the same technique I'm teaching in this class now, this photo etching, this jumpstart etching thing. And so he kept the notes on wet media mylar, all his writings, and then do little schematic sketches in the places where he wanted the etchings. We etched the text into the copper plates, and then he made original etchings in the places he left for the image portion. Yeah. And then we printed the edition an edition of 100. We printed the plates. My wife designed the book. It's beautiful, using the same material that the journals are made from, and then it comes in a beautiful box as well. There's a close-up of it. And the etchings are based on the drawings that are in the journal, the original journal. And there's Charlie talking to some of the students at the opening. This is always a big hit. So in 2016, before Mr. Trump was even the nominee, he was just a candidate, an artist, Brian Whiteley in Brooklyn, decided that he made to make a tombstone, an actual granite tombstone, and he put it in the Sheep's Meadow section of Central Park on Easter Sunday morning, and it was there for about 3 hours, and of course it was photographed by every walker and every runner, and put on the internet. And then the Park Service and the police came and covered it up, and then confiscated it. And then the mission was to find out who the perpetrator was, because they considered it a potential death threat against the candidate. But you read the epitaph, right? There's no death date, which is important. And it says, "Made America Hate Again." And it's really great. And it's a modest little thing. He actually went to a monument shop in Brooklyn, and the guy was like, "I'm not making this. You see that truck out there with the Trump bumper sticker? That's my truck." And he goes, "Okay, I'll go down to the monument guy down the street. He'll do it. It's like a $44,000 stone." And he says, "No." He goes, "What is it for?" I said, "It's an art project." And he said, "Okay, I'll do it." And so he did. And so he makes this thing, and then of course, this thing went viral. It was in the crime section of the New York Times one day, all right? And then the guy, of course, is like furious. He sees in the Times that the tombstone he made was put out in Central Park. And then when they went right, they went to all the police went to all the monument makers in Brooklyn, and the guy gave him up in a second. And they go to his house. Secret Service arrives and interviews him for 4 hours to assure him that it was an art project and not a death threat. And then when they found out who it was, then it was in the art section print of the New York Times. Again, and both those articles I have in the studio. In any case, I was following this whole thing, and I've known him for a few years. And on Instagram, I saw that it took him 4 months to get the stone out of the evidence locker in Queens from the New York Police Department. It still has the evidence sticker. I don't know if you see on top. It still has the evidence sticker on top, and that's the barcode that they keep track of these things. So he finally got it, and I said, "Where's it going to be tomorrow?" And he said, "It's going to be in a storage facility in Queens, not far from where I live." So I said, "I'll meet you there at 1 o'clock as an idea." And I went down with big sheets of Japanese rice paper and a tombstone rubbing puck, right, with pigmented wax, and said, "We'll see if we can make a print from this thing directly from the stone." And sure enough, that's what comes out. It comes out beautifully. So we would do an edition of those directly from the stone. It's very popular. It's a great project. He's done other projects. And there it is, actually in situ in Central Park on Easter Sunday in March of 2016. They come out nice, don't they? They take me longer. Here I'm making the first one in the storage facility. They take me longer than actually inking and wiping and etching. I should have just made a damn etching from it, but here it is. It's something cool to come right off the stone, right? We also made lawn signs for Halloween. So this is me on the left, a painting that is based on some drawings that I did in Beijing. My wife and I were visiting artists at an art residency in Beijing a bunch of years ago. And so this is a painting based on the drawings, and they're done with metallic paints. And the prints are a series of woodcuts that I printed with metallic paints. And it's a series, it's sort of an abstract numerical counting system, with the top left being 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 being the center figure, which is 2 Roman numeral 5s, and reciprocal to each other, and on the other side is the visual reciprocal of 4, 3, 2, 1. So it's a sort of self-contained abstract counting system that dealt with opposites and reciprocals. The gem of the show was John Wilson. John Wilson, African-American artist. I served as his master printer for the last 15 years of his life. He's just absolutely a terrific, amazing man and artist, and it was a real honor to work with him over those years. John was the artist that won the competition to make a bronze sculpture of Martin Luther King that's in the rotunda of the Capitol building in Washington. And he had many studies, these drawings that were studies for it. And one of them was purchased by the MFA in Boston. It was loaned to an exhibition called In the Spirit of Martin that was sponsored by the Smithsonian. And it was supposed to travel for about 18 months, but the MFA didn't tell them that they only allowed it to be out for 3 months because of condition issues. And so they used John's drawing for the cover of the catalog and for all the advertising. And so it was going to be in the show. So I suggested John come to the studio and make an etching based on the drawing. And so the top left etching is the print that came out of that project. And you're going to see a really cool thing after this. In any case, so we want to include John in this exhibition, and what's amazing is that there was one bronze maquette of the bust of King that's in the rotunda that the family owned, and they loaned it to me for this exhibition. And it's about maybe half of size of the final one, but to have that next to the print that he did with me was just a great opportunity, and was a real honor that they were willing to do that. The print below it is just a study print that was a preparation for the King etching, and then the one on the right is based on a big drawing that was a study for an enormous bronze head that sits on the earth, directly on the earth. It's like an 8-foot tall head. This is, you can see a close-up of the King sculpture. And that's a close-up of the actual etching. So to get to an image like that, it takes a long time. Especially you see how worked and how fresh it is. And so it took John, in order for to get the character of the drawing to be right for the mood of the image, but also the likeness had to be strong, and it was a struggle to get those two things to come together. And so it took us 18 tries to get this to happen, and I photographed every print that came off the plate as he struggled to get those things to happen. So that's the final one. That's the first state. That's the sort of the armature, to get the information on the plate. To build the tonal structure on top of it. This is just hard ground line etching. And you see the likeness isn't strong, nor is the character of the drawing very, it's not quite the attitude he was trying to. So he's etching and reworking this every single time. Then I have to stop everything, clean off the plate, and print it. And then each one of these is individual print. So in this last state, he just thought it was just too aggressive and just the likeness wasn't strong. So you can physically scrape the metal back down like erasing, taking all that information away. Huh? And that's what he's doing here. So when I printed this one, his shoulders slumped, he's like, man, I said, John, just think, if you were Francis Bacon, you'd be home by now. So we put what's called an aquatint on it. We etched it completely dark again so that you can start erasing things out. Now, this was interesting. I printed 2 of this version for him, one to keep and one for him to take home so he can actually work on it and erase it and draw with charcoal to get it to be the way he wanted it to look, huh? And that's what he wanted it to look like, and that looks pretty damn good, right? So so this is where we scraped it to, and now he's building it up slowly with aquatint. And we etched it black again. Now you can see he's taking baby steps. He's being very careful. And he went too far. He would go too far, I come back and forth. And boom, then just a little bit of spit biting, a little bit of touch, and we got there. And then I threw what's called a sheen collé. You see that warm tone? That's another sheet of paper behind it. So you separate the image area from the border. And that's the final print. Incredible, right? I mean, I still sort of pinch myself to think that I was part of this thing, because it's probably the most important print to come out of Center Street Studio in the history of my shop. And then here's the treat. That's the actual copper plate with its steel facing on. And here he is working on it in my studio. He passed away in 2015 at the age of 92. That's it. That's the end of the show there. Oh, you can see this is my painting here, which is all metallic inks, all based on drawings that there was a sense of density, both the built environment and just the whole environment. Beijing seemed so claustrophobic, and so I wanted to make paintings that felt that way, but were still structural. And this is the suite of the woodcuts. And I'm going to end by honoring this man. This is Jim Krebs. He was a big supporter, dear friend of our family, and a big supporter of Center Street Studio over the years. And he lived up in Marblehead, and he was the designer of the GE jet engine. This man single-handedly brought the world into the jet era and ran that portion of GE for his entire career. And he just passed away last year at the age of 98. And this is actually, Janine and I went up we missed his birthday party. We went up for his 98th birthday party to celebrate with him, just ourselves. And that's it. Thank you.
What's on? Thank you again for Jim Stroud. Thank you very much. Marvelous. Now we're going to do a Q&A. So if we can get Paul to come back up, we'll get you guys with mics.
Telltale creases.
Great. So now, the only thing we ask is that if you have a question, wait for Sarah or Miracle to bring you a mic because we're live streaming and we want anybody listening and watching at home to be able to hear your questions. With that understood, does anybody have any questions for our wonderful panelists?
Hi, I'm really curious about the watercolor monotype technology. How many, do you just get one print out of it? Or?
One print out of it, yeah. Oh, yes, you get one print out of it. Yes, just the one. But, you know, everyone asks, why don't you just do a watercolor then, right? I mean, because that process, when you're working on the Denril vellum, it doesn't absorb the watercolor. And it allows you to do things wet on wet. It allows you to add some things, let them dry, and then paint over it. It's a really interesting sort of open organic process. And then you only make the commitment to do anything until you run it through the press. You'd like to think sometimes in monotypes there's a ghost left over when you're working with oil, so that you can then work and make a sort of a secondary sort of residual print that's related. But this stuff comes, there's just nothing left on that vellum when you're done. So you get that one shot. But it's so incredibly saturated. You see how saturated those colors are? I mean, my wife introduced me to it, and it just blew me away. The first one you saw, the one that had the sort of the sort of checkerboard, the sort of geometric pattern. Some of it she drew with watercolor pencil, right? Just drew right on it, and that even comes up like specific, like a really tight line. So you get these washes, you get these textures, you get these lines. It's really a versatile and wonderful product, and it was a lifesaver during COVID when my artists couldn't come to the studio. So.
I just want to say, when I come here, I'm always blown away, but I was just blown away by both your presentations, and thank you. I wanted to say to Jim that you totally clarified the role of master printer to me, and it's just such an amazing role. You have to respect the intentions of all these different artists, and you're inventing the technology to translate from different media. It's just incredible. I mean, it's a different kind of creative role than being a single artist, but wow. That's all I have to say, wow. And then,
Well, yeah, and that's why I just love it. I mean, that's, it's just, you know how exciting that is when you figure something out like that for somebody. And I think because I am an artist myself, that there's a certain sensitivity, a certain understanding of process and the way we think, that I basically say to myself, if this was my project, what would I do? You know,
Yeah.
what would I do to make this happen? And because I have a breadth of knowledge of what the possibilities could happen, you know, what those possibilities are, I can do something that brings me toward that. I mean, I would have never known that those Bill Thompson plates would have printed like that, but I just had this whim. And it happens consistently those minutes before you wake in the morning, you know, when your brain seems to be going.
Yeah.
And then I get up out of bed, I go right to the studio,
Yeah.
and I do what I just thought, and that's what happens. And it's extraordinary. Same thing happened with the Marcus Lindenbrink things.
well, it's a beautiful collaboration. I mean, you're giving so much to artists, and they're giving to you. It's really
that's
inspiring,
true.
yeah. And I wanted to say to Paul that I teach young children, and that scene with the music teacher and the piano, it was just so beautifully wrought, and
Thank you.
the whole relationship between adults and children. Oh my goodness, you got it.
Thanks so
Children
much.
have to perform for adults.
You know,
Wow,
I honestly had no
unbelievable.
no idea of how important Mrs. Hill to me
Yeah.
was to me.
Yeah.
You know, for decades until I set that to words. There was something so energizing about just like realizing her own generosity. I'm still in shock that she said, yes, you can do it. You could do a solo.
Yeah.
Like what? That must have, that took some risk, and she must have seen some kind of psychic need in me that I didn't have access to. So, yeah, the book is in most ways, an homage to Joni, but it's also an homage to all the people, all the others, all the peripheral people who have shaped my sensibility and my character, and yeah.
Oh, I can't wait to read it.
Yeah, I
Great.
found out Joni Mitchell through Mrs. Hill. Like, what is this? What was this song that was allowed to be simultaneously joyful and heartbroken at the same time? I'd never heard anything like that.
Yeah.
It felt like adult life.
Yeah,
could
and as
be
a kid,
predicted
it's
from that.
like opening a window and
Yeah, what a relief.
acknowledging.
that
Yeah.
I didn't have to be in this box of
Yeah.
happiness.
Yes, exactly.
Feigned happiness to please the parents.
Here, here. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you both for your sharing your process with us and your gifts. And Paul, I was wondering, the memoir as it is now, sort of this chicken and egg question, what came first? Did you know you wanted to write about Joni, or were you trying to get at something else and she became this guiding light
That's
for
such
you?
a good question. This book came to be in a much different way than any other book. I had posted a photograph of Joni and Brandy Carlisle back in 2021. I tweeted a photo of them, and it was a really lovely moment. And an editor whom I sort of knew on a casual friendship level sent me a DM and said, Paul, would you ever consider writing a book on Joni Mitchell? And very coolly I said, that's an interesting idea. And then he texted back or DM'd back and said, who's your agent? And I told him my agent's name, and he said, I love him. And the book came, it started the next week. So check your DMs. I can't tell you how many times I miss my DMs. And, honestly, Rakesh has known, Joni has been a recurrent figure in all of my books. And I had no idea that he was a fan and had been paying close attention to what I'd been doing. And I was lucky enough to land with an editor who knew my work better than I did. And I'll always be so grateful to him. I literally finished it about a week ago, so I should have mentioned that to you. I think I'm honestly scared about that because the book is due September 15th, and I just want to sit with it for a little while. And in that space come questions like, will people like this? Will this touch an audience? Will this sell? And all the things that feel external to the creative process while you're working. But yeah, I do have an idea for a book after this that would. How many of you know Laura Nero? Yeah, it's not actually. I adore Laura as much as I adore Joni, but she doesn't have the cultural cachet, and I think there'd be something interesting to write something, maybe not necessarily a memoir, but something where Laura's work would be, I don't know, a jump-off point. He might say, no. I know he's a Laura fan, but thanks for asking.
Hi, Paul.
Hey,
I
Michelle.
just was wondering about because this section felt so much about childhood as like in the way that music and adults function in childhood. And I was just wondering how the other sections of the novel, like is it sort of different points in life kind of meeting Joni again and how it's structured?
Yeah, you intuited it, Michelle. Yeah, it's a collection of pressure points in my life at which Joni is somehow at the center. There are several concerts in the book, the Gorge concerts in the book. I sat in the second row of the Both Sides Now concert at the Fleet Pavilion in 2000, and Joni and I had sustained eye contact as she was exiting her intermission, and she looked at me with such fondness. And we just enjoyed looking at each other for 10 seconds. And that's, the book is, there are many moments in the book that are kind of like stop time moments, like the end of, falling out of clock time to do something different. So that's one of them. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's the whole Paul Lisicky life in there. Right. Yeah. Yeah, and there's actually a point in the book where I sort of break up with Joni and stop listening to the music, and I'm at a party in grad school, and someone brings up a song from Wild Things Run Fast, and I can't stop. I'm shocked by that fountaining.
Just maybe I should know this, but I don't. Are you yourself a musician?
Yeah.
And was it her music or her that intrigued you so much?
Oh, definitely her music. I think she's an interesting figure biographically, but yeah, it was always the songs. It was always the open tunings, the modality of the music, the strange leaps, that sense that she's making herself up in a song every time. She does not follow a template. And I think what's thrilling about her work is that we're witness as listeners to an act of discovery. That's what energizes her work, and not just on a musical level, but a lyrical level. They're all acts of wandering, and that taught me she taught me everything. So I did start, to go back to the beginning of your question, I did start as a musician, and I was writing and publishing songs as a young person, and at some point in my 20s, I became more interested in writing and became pushed by various teachers. But my music, my writing has always talked back to what I want to do open tunings, but with words. I want the same, to reach for the same kind of structural adventures, the same kind of inquiry that makes that work feel so propulsive and ambiguous.
One other quickie. When I was younger, art was forbidden. I wasn't allowed to even think about making art. So I knew I was going to be an artist. And that's what triggered my... Do you remember when...
Yeah, I've started to make things at 3 years old. I mean, I knew that was the only, I think I grew up, I'm learning at my age that I grew up in a pretty chaotic household in which my parents did the best that they could, but making art was the means to change. It was a means to make self. It kept me alive, whether that was through drawing or writing songs or little stories. I just knew on an intuitive level that I had to do this in order to live.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for your questions.
I have a question for both of you. I'm very new to writing nonfiction, and maybe this is just because of what I do for my day job, which is moral philosophy, but I kind of feel like when I'm writing about other people, that I have to write about them in a way that I could explain myself to them. They don't have to like it, but I have to be able to explain myself somehow. And since both of you work both with other people and their work as well, what kind of sense of obligation do you feel to other people when you're trying to work with them and their ideas and their projects?
Are you talking about the other peoples as characters within, say, my work? Or,
Yeah.
I mean, I think Jim might be eloquent when it comes to this question.
Eloquent. Oh my gosh. Obligation, responsibility. I have a lot. I mean, I'm there to make it right, and or to find a way to make it meaningful, right? So, and it's on my nickel. So there's a lot of pressure, to figure out a way to make something that works for them, and to make it true to their work, right? To their own way of working, their own practice. But this is a medium outside of their normal practice, and so they have to trust in me a little bit, right? So and what's great is that most of my artists are not printmakers, so when I screw up, they don't really notice. So and I can sort of somehow work it into the whole process, But yeah, there's it's because I'm involved. I'm sort of vested on many levels. So yeah. But it's funny, there's no pressure, though. It's not like I feel that if this doesn't happen, that the whole world's going to crumble. I mean, I somehow make it work.
Yeah, I have a question for Jim. The last question kind of leads into it perfectly. When I was looking at the paintings and the pieces, I actually liked the prints better than a lot of the work that the people did originally. And I do both. I was a printmaker in college, and so I was like really nerding out on all the printmaking stuff, and I'm a painter now. But I wondered if anyone's work changed after doing prints, if it informed their work that they brought in from working with the prints.
There are definitely times that they've come and made prints with me, and it's made a profound effect on their work in painting. Matter of fact, just recently, an artist named Jeff Perrott came in and did a series of these direct dry point things. Actually, it was during COVID, right? So that he had to work directly on the plate with the needle scratching away, and then drop them off, and then I proof them and for that. And from those prints, a whole new series of paintings came, and that. That's fantastic for me. I mean, I feel really great, but it's. I think it goes back. It should go back and forth. It's all part of the same energy. It's all part of the same trajectory. And so printmaking can be a catalyst for that. Every once in a while, and any artist worth their salt is going to understand that. I mean, those no longer seems like there's a hierarchy. The printmaking used to be sort of the second cousin to everything else, but now there's so many artists in the world, out there that printmaking is a main part of their practice, and just look at Jasper Johns and Rauschenberg. I mean, the bodies of work. I mean, Picasso. Look at Picasso's prints. I mean, he took it really seriously. So, and it does what it's supposed to do, right? It's supposed to be, because you do them in multiples, it gets them out to more people, and that's what it's all about.
Hi, this question is for Paul. So your reading really brought to mind, in a strange way, The Birth of Loud by Ian Port, where he actually talks about the history of the electric guitar. And he has all these scenes where he renders, concerts from Jimi Hendrix and things like that. Certainly concerts he never attended. And I was curious about, especially in the section that you read, there was sort of like an internal moment with Joni as well, in addition to sort of the, her life as a performer. And so I'm curious about what was your process for rendering and putting together and reconstructing moments like that. You mentioned there's several concerts throughout the book. Are they concerts that you attended? And then, there's like that Margot Jefferson article about Beyonce where she famously never met with Beyonce. So I'm just curious how that process was for you. Thanks for your reading.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. It's different from chapter to chapter. Earlier in that Both Sides Now chapter, I imagine myself as being in the polio clinic with Joni. She was in a polio clinic with a young boy who she both befriended and was annoyed by, and spurred her to sing at the top of her lungs. So there are moments that are kind of wry and winking that attempt to enfold into her life. There are moments in which the speaker projects into Joni's imagination, into Joni's mother's imagination. So I think I give the reader enough signals to follow these moves. I know so much about her at Sick. I mean, I know I've always known a lot about her, but within the last year of working, year and 2 months working on this book, I just became a magnet for Joni material. I was just telling Jude a few days ago, I even know the quality of her well water in her house in British Columbia. that I read with deep love and fascination. So, which her well water is not in the book, but.
And how is it, by the way? What's the mineral content?
There's been some salt seepage. It's not.
A lot of iron.
Not great, which I think is true of many wells in that part of British Columbia, right along the Strait of Georgia. Is that satisfying? Yeah, it's just. Okay.
So I was just wondering what the greatest advice you've both ever had was. And I also was curious, second question. What has the process of creating your projects taught you about yourselves?
That's an extra credit question, I think. The best advice I had was early on by a really terrific printmaker named Bob Blackburn in New York, right? And I had a breakfast meeting with him and a paper representative from Sweden who got word, she came through Yale, and I don't know what she was trying to sell people, paper or what. But it's the company that actually makes the paper for Swedish currency, so it must be good. But in any case, she invited me to a breakfast with Robert Blackburn in New York, and he said, "You're starting a print shop?" Sort of like, do you know what you're getting into? And I didn't. If I did, I probably wouldn't have started. If I knew how hard it was to do what I do, I wouldn't have done it. But he said to me, "Keep it small." And I was like how small? And he's like, just keep it small, because he'd grown his shop into this big collaborative or more cooperative workshop, and had to write grants day in and day out to keep it running, and he had all these people coming through, and had to carve out time for his own work, and he eventually won a MacArthur, which I told he just dumped right back into the shop. But I kept it small. It's me and a studio assistant for the this is going to we're moving into my 40th year of collaborative printmaking, which is astounding to me. And it's just me and a studio assistant. With that, I'm actually no studio assistant since when COVID hit. I didn't have a studio assistant, and I haven't had one since. But anyway, that was my best advice.
So many lessons, I think, were I metabolized them. Alan Gurganis was one of my teachers in grad school, and I don't remember a particular lesson, but I remember his face when he talked about Alice Munro, and he was rapt and talked about that work with such deep respect and passion. And I think that was like the greatest lesson from grad school. Later, my ex, who is a poet, and I were having a discussion about, questions about the direction of my work. And he knew that I very much liked working within the frame of short pieces. And I said, well, that's not, no publisher of any force is interested in work on such a microscopic level. And he told me that his belief was that, if you kept doing it, people would hear about it, and that was the thing to do. I think for all of us, it's so easy to be caught up in we all get career directions from outside, and we all think that we should be, doing step 1 and step 2, and I don't think that's the way it goes. I actually put that moment in the book because it was life-changing, and I also wanted to put a moment in the book that was a moment of gratitude toward him and those years we'd spent together. So yeah, if you're doing something weird and everyone tells you to stop it, just keep doing the weird thing, and do it as weirdly as you can, and it will be talked about. It might not happen through an expected route, but yeah, just keep doing it.
There's a second half of that extra credit question, right? So it's what has it taught us about ourselves, right? I really like that part of the question because, and it took me a while to really come to understand it. But as the years went by, and as I worked with artists whose practice was very different from my own, and I had to sort of almost incorporate it into my own, it actually validated. I realized there's so many different ways of working and thinking and making, approaching art, that it actually validated my own. That we all have this sort of level of insecurity as we try to make something meaningful, and seeing how they approached it, and then absorbing myself into that, sort of gave me courage to follow my own path. So.
Yeah, ditto for me as well. Yeah, honestly, it's just, faith in what excites you, faith in your discoveries. The real pleasure of this is not the awards or the advances or the fancy galleries. The pleasure is those things are all important and great. We don't want to do this without, I'm interested in communication. I want to touch people, but the real joy for me is just in and surprise, and making sure that I'm not doing the same thing again and again. That feels life-giving to me. That's sustained my life thus far.
Extra credit. We got extra credit.